Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. I'm very happy to have another chance to spend time with all of you to share the teachings of the Buddha. Let's take a moment to be very intentional about our time and our space together. So, whatever we have been doing this morning, whatever running around has been occupying our mind and our time and our energy, let's put all of that to the side. Whatever our to do list is for the rest of the day, whatever we want to accomplish the rest of the weekend, let's put all that away for the moment and let ourselves be fully present together in this space. And as we do that, let us take a moment to set a very strong motivation that the reason we are coming together this morning to study these teachings, the reason we are coming together to study our mind, to try to follow the wisdom and advice of Shakyamuni Buddha, is not merely for our own benefit, but so that we might be of maximum benefit to others. So we study the teachings, we learn how to develop peace and calm and joy in our own lives so that we might be able to utilize all of our skills, all of our wisdom, all of our heart, our compassion to be of service to other sentient beings. So our practice has the long-term goal of trying to achieve Buddhahood, not merely for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others. So that be the motivation that you bring with you to all of your Dharma practice, to all of your life's practice in general, and especially as we sit down together to study this text and to spend some time together. I'm here today so that I might quickly and more quickly become a Buddha, so that I might be of maximum benefit to other sentient beings. And as we try to keep that motivation strong in our mind, we'll offer some preliminary prayers. We'll start with refuge and bodhicitta, which we'll offer 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll continue with the other prayers in English. Sangye churan soki chonam la janchu pardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pinche sangye drupar shok. Sangye churan soki chonam la janchu pardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pinche sangye drupar shok. Sangye cheran soki chonam la chanchu pardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi drola pinche sangye drupar shok. I go for refuge and am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And now I'll offer a short mandala offering twice, once in Tibetan, then once in English. So as you offer this, we offer this representation of the entire cosmos, of all that exists, that we purify so it has no stains, no faults. And then we offer it on behalf of all sentient beings to all the Buddhas and all the Bodhisattvas, as well as to our teachers. So it's traditional to offer at the beginning of a teaching session to request a teaching from the teacher. And then you also offer to request all the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So keep this in mind as you make this offering. 사시프기 조익심에도 트라미라블링시 니데겐판디 상계싱도 미테와이 조키나만다클링라 제파이쇼. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field, and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And we'll continue by offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. He's helping us collect merit, recognize the benefits of the three jewels. To the founder, then endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born in this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And we'll continue with the Heart Sutra, the actual words of the Buddha, helping us remember emptiness and the importance of recognizing the true nature of reality as it pertains to our dealing with our mind and our dealing with the afflictions that arise in our mind. We always want to balance both merit and wisdom. So we need these two aspects. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagwan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagwan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated, and even that the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagwan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagawan. Great. Thank you so much. So, as we begin our study today, I'll just remind everyone that you can ask questions whenever you like, as needed. I'll save some time at the end as well. I won't see if you raise your hand or anything like this, or ask it in the chat. So go ahead and you can interrupt me, and that's fine. As we go about studying today, we want to adopt the qualities that are appropriate for a student, for a good student, that is, which is to say we want to be non-partisan. This is according to Aryadeva in his 400 verses. We want to adopt an attitude of being non-partisan, which is to say we don't come in to our practice or our study with an opinion that we already know all the answers and that we're correct, right? We want to be open-minded and receptive to whatever it is that we're studying. We want to have an attitude of being intelligent, right? A good student is marked by being intelligent. And what this means isn't that you have to, get all A levels on all your exams, but it means that you have to be willing to learn. You have to be interested. You have to be willing to investigate the teachings and not just receive them, like an animal. You have to actually be willing to put in the work. That's what we mean by intelligent. And we have to be diligent, right? So that's the last quality of a good student, is that we actually exert the effort in trying to study, in trying to contemplate, and in trying to meditate, right? All of the different processes that are necessary in order to take these teachings and make them meaningful parts of our life. So we have to adopt or embody these characteristics of being nonpartisan, of being intelligent, and being diligent. And these are some of the characteristics that make up or qualify a good student, right? A student that is an appropriate vessel for receiving the teachings. Looking over the verses that we're going to be covering today, this chapter that we're discussing is all about introspection, right? And it's all about how the mind is the source of all of our suffering, and it is our greatest enemy, the uncontrolled mind. And yet at the same time, it is the source of our salvation, right? Our mind is what brings us all of our happiness. Our mind is what frees us from samsara. But if we don't watch our mind, if we aren't careful with our mind, if we don't tame the mind, then that is why we experience suffering, right? And thinking about this, I think especially of the verse that we recited it in one of the prayers, one of the early prayers, in the prayers to Shakyamuni, the verse that says, "Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha." This verse is all we need to know about how to practice the Dharma, how to make the Dharma important in every moment of our life. And in many ways, it repeats itself. The third line, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the summary of the first two lines. The first two lines say, do not commit any non-virtuous actions, but perform only perfect virtuous actions. And what's the summary of that? Subdue your mind thoroughly. In the Mahayana context, to subdue your mind thoroughly and to practice virtue means to work for the benefit of others, not simply for yourself alone. To practice, to avoid all non-virtuous actions means to totally eliminate your self-grasping mind and your self-cherishing mind and all of the afflictive minds that come from that, which lead you to engage in non-virtuous activities of body and speech. We can really think about this one verse, and that can contain all of the teachings we need if we want to lead a meaningful life, if we want to lead a life that is dedicated not just to practicing Dharma, but actually to finding contentment and peace and joy for ourselves and for all those around us, right? That's all we need, is that one verse that has everything in it. So it's, this section of this text especially has a lot of like pithy verses that you might want to like write down or put on a sticky note next to your computer monitor to remind yourself of. And if you're going to have verses like that you carry with you throughout the day, this verse is one of those verses, as well as some of the verses we might come across today later. It really encompasses everything. And if we can remind ourselves what it means to tame our mind, right? If we can remind ourselves of that throughout the day, then it makes all of our activity much more powerful. Because we spend so much of our days, or I can speak for myself, I spend so much of my time not thinking about what I'm doing. And I may be pursuing virtuous action. I may be studying the Dharma. I may be talking to my classmates. My Dharma siblings. I may be doing virtuous work. But I get into a habit, right, of doing it without thinking about it. We should always be very attentive to what we're doing. And it's that attention that makes sure our motivation is pure and that we are doing it to the best of our ability, whatever that action is, whether it's a worldly activity or a spiritual activity, that it isn't something that we just do by default, that we're very intentional about going about whatever it is we're doing. And in the process, we're always watching our mind to make sure that none of these afflictive minds sneak in, right? The self-cherishing mind, we say we want to avoid self-cherishing and all of the subsidiary minds that come from self-cherishing. And we could talk about them till we're blue in the face. And I do talk about them until I'm blue in the face. And we'll talk about them more today because there are many of them. But the truth is, most of the time, these aren't like screaming at the front of our mind, right? It's not like lighting itself up in disco lights and like waving its hands. These minds are subtle. They sneak in. They give the appearance of seeking out happiness, of trying to benefit us. That is why they're so insidious and dangerous, is because they seem like they're going to be helping us out. Or they sneak in when we're not paying attention. And it's very easy to mistake a sense of accomplishment for pride, right? Or vice versa, rather. A sense of pride and ego is actually not a sense of accomplishment and a job well done, but it's self-cherishing that says, look at how good I am. But they seem very similar, right? So they sneak in. And if we're not actively trying to tame our mind, if we're not reminding ourselves that it's my mind that has been circling in samsara over and over again. This body has only been in samsara for the past few decades, right? This body is not what's keeping me trapped in samsara. This body is a result of samsara. It's my mind that is keeping me trapped in samsara over and over again. And if I don't remind myself of that, then I'm just going to repeat that pattern. And all of these afflictive minds will sneak in. And all of a sudden, when I actually take a step back and I realize that I'm not happy, I'm not fulfilled, I'm not content, I realize it's because I haven't been taming my mind, that I've been allowing these afflictive minds to sneak in and hijack my everyday, my everyday activities. And we don't realize it, right? So just reminding ourselves, I will always abandon all non-virtuous actions. I will adopt only perfect virtuous actions, and I will tame or subdue my mind thoroughly. That is everything I need to know about how to practice the Dharma and how to lead a meaningful life. And so reminding ourselves of that is important. And part and parcel with that is when I'm saying I'm taming my mind, and that's how I find happiness, it's because I recognize that the outside world is not where my problems come from, right? Now, there are a lot of problems in the world. There's no denying that. We look outside our window, we watch the news, we look at our phone, and it seems like the world is on fire all over the place. And that's true. Like, I'm not denying that. Okay. Buddhism doesn't try to gaslight us to say, oh, there's nothing wrong. It's all in your mind. No, there's a lot of difficulties in the world. And those difficulties make it harder for us to have peace and contentment. Definitely. External circumstances and the environment we find ourselves in affect our mind and affect our ability to practice. Now, when we've tamed our mind to a sufficient degree, we can recognize and experience those external difficulties without letting them upset us, without letting our minds, travel into all of these unhealthy ways or healthy realms. But until we have actually tamed our mind completely, then we're very much affected by the world. And even if we have tamed our mind, we still look at the suffering of others and we want to eliminate it, right? So, I've seen His Holiness, whenever His Holiness gives talks, I've often seen him talk about the suffering of the people in Tibet, because he's talking about how to generate compassion, and he just starts crying. Just thinking about the suffering that people are experiencing causes this sadness in him. Now, for someone like Dalai Lama or any other advanced practitioner who has tamed their mind, that sadness isn't something that is overwhelming them, but it's a recognition that they're suffering in the world and they want to do everything they can to eliminate that suffering. So I'm not saying that external problems don't exist and that difficulties don't exist. And I'm not saying that just by taming our mind, we'll be in a land of bliss all the time, perfectly happy, because we deal with the outside world. But we can learn how to not react to the outside world in such a way that we have control over our own well-being, over our own emotional stability, and over how we engage in the world around us, right? So we're not going to remove all the problems of the external world by fighting against the world. We're going to remove the problems by transforming our minds. What this means, though, is that while we recognize the difficulties of the external world and how they create obstacles and make it more easy to follow afflictive minds, we don't blame the external world. We don't put blame on others. We recognize that my own suffering is coming from my own mind. And part and parcel with this means I'm not going to be passive about taming my mind. Right? The Dharma is about transformation. The Dharma is about realizing our full potential, right? Becoming the Buddhas that we have the capacity to be. Slowly but surely working our way up to eliminating all of our afflictive minds, eliminating our self-grasping that's causing us to cycle in samsara over and over again, realizing our potential of bodhicitta, and actively accomplishing the two accumulations of wisdom and merit, right? That's what we are working towards. That's an active type of transformation. It isn't passive. It's easy to look at some of the teachings and think that they encourage us to be passive. When we think about karma, especially, it's easy to say, well, if that's my karma to experience this, that's my karma. Therefore, I'm not going to do anything about it. Or if it's that person's karma to experience poverty or homelessness or suffering, it's their karma. It's not my job to do anything about it. Right? It's easy to misunderstand the teachings and think that they are giving us an excuse to be passive. That's not the case, right? It's always our responsibility to do everything we can to benefit others and to benefit ourselves in a worldly sense and in a spiritual sense. And if we have the means and resources to help others, then we should be doing that. And to say that it's their karma to experience suffering, that may be true. It's also their karma to be in an environment where they have access to people who could help them, such as us, right? So there are many things we can't change, right? At least not change easily about the external world. But we have to, the Dharma compels us to say, what can I do to be a force of good in the world? What can I do to help others around me, whether they are close to me or others that are strangers to me? Whether they live in my community, in my neighborhood, or whether they live on the other side of the world. Is there something I can be doing to help them? And if there's no direct thing I can do to help them, then I can at least work to transform my mind so that in the future I will accumulate more tools, more techniques, more wisdom that will let me help other sentient beings more completely in the future. So that's the baseline we should always be doing. But if there are other things we can do, we do that as well. You know, I mean, for me personally, the call to practice the life of a bodhisattva, right, is to adopt the attitude of a courageous warrior, which is recognizing that I am going to sacrifice my own immediate well-being and happiness for others whenever I'm able to do so, right? To practice compassion, to actively wish to eliminate all the suffering of other sentient beings and all the causes of suffering takes courage. It isn't an easy thing to do. Um, I often think of so for me, I mean, for me, Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, especially, and the idea of social justice go hand in hand. Like the idea of separating those two is silly. And there's a thing in 20th and 21st century Western Buddhism to talk about socially active, socially engaged Buddhism. And that's fine. I think it's useful for like contemporary practitioners to talk that way, to think that way. But I think all Buddhism is socially engaged. And the idea that there is any Buddhist practice that is not socially engaged means you're not really understanding the Dharma if you think that your Buddhist practice is telling you to only care about yourself, especially Mahayana practice, right? So I think socially engaged Buddhism is just kind of like repeating itself. It's a little redundant. But that's okay. I mean, if that helps people understand things in a more useful or meaningful way, then great. But I often think about um, Howard Zinn, who is an American historian. He famously wrote the book "The People's History of the United States." He passed away, I think, in 2010. But his famous line that says, "You can't afford to be neutral on a moving train," which is to say that when we see injustice and suffering in the world, if we have something to do about it, if there's something we can do about it, we have to do something about it. Just as a human, we have that responsibility, but especially as Buddhists, right? The Dharma is not saying tame your mind at the expense of other sentient beings. You're taming your mind so you can benefit other sentient beings. That is how you find joy and contentment and peace and happiness in your life, is by working for others, right? Recognizing that your suffering comes from your own mind, that your self-grasping and your self-cherishing are what are causing you so much discomfort and misery, and then realizing that the best way to overcome, the only way to overcome that misery, is to stop focusing on the I, on the ego, on the me. Stop trying to make yourself the center of attention, and instead recognize that you can work to benefit others. That is how you find joy and contentment in your life, right? That is how you deal with the stress of everyday life, is by committing yourself to help others to the best of your ability, by standing up for what you believe in, and by not allowing yourself to sacrifice your spiritual or dharma ideals for worldly power or just convenience. You know what I mean? I think I was really motivated this week by the example from the Pope, and I don't I don't often have a lot of good things to say about the Catholic Church as an institution, and as an institution, it's done a lot of harm throughout the few centuries, going back to the Inquisition and the Crusades and so forth. And in the last few decades, a lot of harm to young people and a lot of abuse and covering up that abuse, knowing about it. So I don't have any kind words for the institution of the Catholic Church. But very recently, and I will also say this Pope and the most recent Pope, the one before this, they have this facade of being progressive, yet the Catholic Church itself still has these worldly dogmas that create subjugation and hierarchies of power that I don't think are particularly helpful. So this facade of being progressive and liberal hides the fact that they don't actually try to address systemic issues within the institution of the church. So I'm always reticent to give too much credit to the Catholic Church. But recently, I think if anyone watches the news, they know that the particularly unhinged president of the United States has been comparing himself to Jesus, essentially. And the Pope has openly said that good Christians don't engage in this kind of warfare, and they don't seek out to hurt others for their own benefit. And he has openly spoken against the actions of the United States government in a way that is very vocal and very explicit. And he's an American, right? This Pope. He's born in Chicago. And to have potentially the most powerful person on the planet right now, being the president of the United States, actively speak out against you, and he doesn't, he doesn't waver at all. And he says, no, this is what we believe. This is what I understand Jesus to have taught. And the Pope, according to the Catholic Church, is the vicar of Christ. And he says, what you're doing is not what Christianity calls for us to do. And so he didn't sacrifice his spiritual beliefs in the face of worldly convenience. Being on the opposite end of the most powerful person in the planet right now, or one of the most powerful people on the planet, whether we want him to be that powerful or not. Donald Trump is that powerful as the president. Being willing to stand up for your beliefs in the face of that takes a lot of courage. And we need to have the similar courage, right? That when we understand the Dharma, when we understand the transformative power of a spiritual practice, then we should not allow worldly convenience or worldly prestige cause us to sacrifice our spiritual ideals. And it's almost, worldly convenience is almost more dangerous than something like prestige or something like power, right? If someone is just seeking out power very blatantly, that's easy to recognize and kind of stop in yourself, at least. I mean, but when you're just doing something out of convenience, it often goes under the radar. You don't realize that you're sacrificing your ideals just because it's a little easier, right? And even simple things like, I want to have a meditation practice where I meditate every morning, but honestly, waking up that extra half hour early is just a little bit too difficult. So I can do it at more convenient time. I can find time later in the day, even if I know that doing it in the morning starts out my day well, I'm fresh, my mind is focused, it's very helpful. It's more convenient for me to do it at a different time. Small things like that, you're giving up your spiritual idealism and your understanding of the Dharma for the conveniences of samsara, right? And now, of course, sometimes you have to make accommodations because you live in the world and you have to deal with the world around you. So sometimes you have to make accommodations. That's true. But a lot of time, those accommodations we make aren't because we have to, but because it's just easier to. And the truth is, by doing that, we're always shortchanging ourselves. Every time we make an accommodation like that, especially one that we don't have to make, then what we're doing is we're denying ourselves the actual opportunity to practice Dharma in a meaningful way. So what we're doing is by taking that shortcut, we are preventing future happiness. Every single one of those shortcuts, that's what it's doing. And it may not seem like it immediately, right? But every time we cut corners when we don't have to, then we're preventing our future happiness and our future growth. So subdue your mind thoroughly. Right? That is what we need to be doing all the time. We need to remind ourselves to subdue our mind doesn't just mean that we're passive. It means that we are actively seeking out opportunities to live the spiritual life the best we know how, no matter where we find ourselves, no matter what environment we're in, right? So our study and our practice, they need to be improving our lives. They aren't something that we keep contained inside our meditation hall. The reason we study texts like this isn't because studying 8th century texts is a fun thing to do and we want to have the scholarly intellect. It's because these texts show us how we can live in the world to find contentment, peace, happiness, and be of service to others, right? The teachings of the Buddha and all of the commentators and all of the subsequent commentaries, they aren't, this isn't an intellectual exercise. We're not going to be tested on this in some university system. We're doing this because it can transform our lives. So if we're not letting the Dharma transform our lives, then why are we studying it, right? And so just studying it isn't enough. We have to study it. We have to wrestle with it. We have to contemplate it. We have to meditate on it. And then we have to put it into practice. We have to take whatever techniques are available to us to make the Dharma part of our everyday life all the time. That is how we discover transformation, or we experience transformation, I should say. And it's not easy, right? It's not easy. It sounds easy to talk about, and it's very encouraging to talk about, but we have been living our lives not following this path our whole life, never mind previous lives. So we have to rearrange our whole mental habits and dispositions in order to live a more meaningful life. So it's not easy. It's not going to happen overnight, and we can't beat ourselves up when we're not perfect. But what we can do is we recognize when we haven't lived up to our ideals, we acknowledge it, and then we vow to do better. And we always try to aim at Buddhahood. As long as we're always looking towards Buddhahood, we're working towards that goal, then we're doing the right thing. Okay? We're not expected to become Buddhas overnight because it's impossible. But what the Dharma does expect of us is that we're always doing our best. And that's going to change depending on our day, on our circumstances, what's going on in our life, right? What I could do as a daily practice last year, maybe I can't do this year because I have more responsibilities, or because my work changed, or because of X, Y, and Z. That's fine. But I'm still doing the best I can with whatever resources I have. That means taking care of my mind first, making sure my motivation is clear and and I'm aware of why I'm doing the work I'm doing, both internal work and external work, and then recognizing what opportunities I have around me to be of service to others, those in my family, in my community, in my monastery, in my neighborhood, in the world, however that might be. It might just mean I can make offerings if I have the financial resources to make offerings to nonprofit organizations doing good work, or it might mean going to serve food to people that are hungry, or it might mean just being polite to people when I meet them on the street because that's all I have the resources for right now. Right? That may be all it is that when I see people I don't know, I smile at them and I try to communicate a desire for their happiness. That might be all I have the resources for, both physical or emotional resources for. And if that is all I have the resources for, then fine, that's what I'm going to do. Whatever it is that I can do, I'm going to do to the best of my ability and recognize that from day to day, that's going to change. But if I am clear on my motivation and I'm clear that I'm trying to tame my mind, that I'm watching my mind to make sure that I'm not being hijacked by the afflictions and that I actually am trying to achieve the benefit of all sentient beings and to remove them from suffering, to become Buddha for their sake, then I'm on the right path. And then when you take a step back from that, right, in the day to day, it can be difficult to see how the Dharma is transforming your life. Sometimes when you first start studying Dharma, then in the beginning, it's like a revelation, right? Because you're having all these new insights you didn't have before. And that is very wonderful. It's very encouraging. But then after you've been studying for a while, it can fall off. And you don't see the day-to-day transformation anymore because you already have an understanding of the teachings and you're involved in them in such a way that you don't see the changes that are happening. But when you have been practicing for a few months or a few years, and then you take a step back, you may not be able to see the incremental change day to day, but you can take a step back and say, what was my mind like a year ago? A year ago, how would I have dealt in this exact same situation? When you experience suffering, especially when some obstacle arises and you navigate it in in a healthy way, then you can take a step back and you say, wait a second, how would I have done this even a year ago or even a month ago, like that? And so by doing that kind of reflective work, you can see that the Dharma is changing your life. And it may not be something you see every single day, right? Your practice may not be something you can identify as transformative in your day-to-day moment-to-moment experiences. Maybe you can. You might be able to. And if so, that's wonderful. It's a great opportunity for rejoicing. But for most of us, there'll be peaks and valleys, and there'll be moments of really big transformative change and insight. But most of what we're doing is a slow, steady work that we are improving our minds slowly. And when you take a step back, then you can notice the great benefits you've had. I know, like for me personally, I started studying when I got to college, is when I met Buddhism and I started studying Buddhism. And I very intentionally, when I started studying Buddhism, and then I took refuge and I was given a Dharma name, I used that Dharma name, a Tibetan name, because I wanted to always be reminded that I'd committed myself to engaging in a spiritual practice. And when you're living, I went to a private 4-year college, so I was living away from home with a bunch of other, 20-year-olds. It's very easy to be distracted from your commitments to spiritual path, right? There's lots of distractions. That's what, college is for in many ways. So being called a Tibetan name all the time forced me to remember that I had committed myself to engaging in the spiritual path. But even then, if I were to look at my activities at that time, I wouldn't really, it was hard for me to see anything that was happening, right, to my mind. But then I'd go home and I'd see my family who hadn't seen me for months, and they were like, wow, you have changed. You are a different person, right? So my family saw the benefit of my Dharma practice in a clearer way than I did because I was living it and because I didn't do the reflective work to actually notice it, right, until later. So sometimes that reflective work isn't necessary if you're confident that you're practicing in a meaningful way, but sometimes it can be useful. Sometimes doing that reflective work can encourage you, especially when you feel like you are struggling a little bit, especially when you feel like no matter how much you practice, you have more problems all around. When you feel that way, take a step back and look at where your mind is now and where it was a month ago, where it was 6 months ago, and see how much improvement you've had in your mind and how you're able to experience obstacles with less force or less sentimentality, than you would have previously. Just practicing Dharma doesn't immediately make us free from suffering, but what it does is it teaches us the techniques to acknowledge that suffering in a way that isn't as overwhelming. So that is what we need to be able to do. And if you don't need to do that reflective work, if you have confidence in your practice and you have confidence in the teachings, then that's great. But it can be helpful sometimes just to take a step back and to rejoice in the work we've done. rejoicing is such a powerful, powerful, powerful activity and practice. Kabji Lama's Rinpoche always emphasizes that you rejoice all the time in your own merit and in the merit of others, in your own virtuous activity and in the virtuous activity of others, in the fruition of positive karma for yourself and for others. Always rejoice. It's the most powerful thing you can do, because what it does is it is aligning your mind with virtue. It is making your mind take delight in virtue. And by taking delight in virtue, it means you are automatically attracted to virtuous activity. So not only are you accumulating merit just by engaging in a mind of rejoicing, you're also preparing your mind to recognize the benefits of virtuous activity in yourself and others. So then virtuous activity becomes easier. It becomes more default, if that makes sense. Even when we, in the one of the first prayers we did is a 7-limb prayer, right? Which is very common, the 7-limb prayers. So the 7 limbs of the 7-limb prayer are prostration, offering, confessing negative deeds, and then rejoicing, right? Is the fourth of the 7 limbs. And then you have requesting the teacher to remain, beseeching them to teach, and then dedicating. That fourth limb of rejoicing, when Lama Zopa would lead any of a prayer, after that fourth limb, he would stop. And for a full minute or 2 minutes, you would just meditate on rejoicing. It doesn't matter what other prayer you were doing, where you were in your practice. When you get to that line of rejoicing, you take a moment and you just meditate for a minute on rejoicing. We don't do that in our center right now, but you might go to other FPMT centers and you'll notice after they recite a line about rejoicing, everyone stops and meditates for a minute on rejoicing. That's how important it is. Okay. So it's okay to take stock of where you are in your practice and to rejoice in everything you've accomplished. But by doing so, you shouldn't become, like I said, don't allow yourself to become static or passive. You allow that recognition of your success to then encourage you to keep working, right? Because until we're Buddhas, there's more work to be done. And that shouldn't be something that is depressing us. That should be exciting. Because if you say, I've been practicing for 6 months or a year or for 5 years or for 10 years, and I realize that I've made this much benefit in that amount of time, then if I realize there's still more work to do, then how much better can my mind become? How much happier can I be in this life? How much more service can I offer to others if I continue to work on my mind? So it becomes an opportunity for celebration when you look at the fact that there's still more work to be done. And if even the small amount of work I've done so far has had such a monumental transformation in my mind, imagine if I keep working, right? Yes, our practice can be difficult at times. There can be growing pains. Looking at our own minds and realizing that a lot of our, not a lot, all of our grief is coming from our own mind, right? That can be hard sometimes. That's just the truth of it. When you realize that you're sabotaging your own happiness quite often, then that is not an easy thing to accept. So there's growing pains in our practice. Okay, there's no doubt about that. But you can get over those things because when you recognize that it's not the external pressures, it's not your boss or your family or your job, it's not the war, it's not the president, it's not the government that's causing you suffering. It is your own mind and the way you react to those external circumstances that's actually causing you suffering. When you actually can realize that, then when you can actually do something about it by taming your mind, by working to benefit others, then the joy you experience is so profound that those growing pains are worth it. Okay? They're definitely worth it. But it takes energy, it takes effort, and it isn't always fun. If you spend, the idea that ignorance is bliss, like that saying doesn't come out of nowhere. There are times when I was talking to one of my friends. I don't remember the context, but he was just saying it'd be easier if he didn't believe in karma because he knows that like what he wants to do is not going to bring him happiness, but like he just wants to do it anyway because it would just be easier than doing the right thing. But the fact that we understand how karma works means he can't do that because he knows it's only going to cause suffering right now and in the future. But it would be sometimes easier if I didn't actually understand how karma works, if I didn't understand the teachings of the Buddha, because ignorance allows me to pretend that this worldly happiness is real happiness, right? That's what ignorance is. That's what self-cherishing is. This worldly experience is the most important thing in the world. And therefore, I'm going to do everything I can to celebrate samsara. And that feels great in the moment, or it can at least, but all it's doing is setting you up for longer suffering in the long term, both in this life and in future lives. If you're only focused on the here, now, immediate moment and my pleasure right now, my satisfaction right now, then you're not focused on the big picture. You're not focused on being free from samsara. You're focused on engaging in samsara. You're celebrating samsara, which means you're celebrating suffering, which means you're grabbing on a suffering with both hands and saying, look at this happiness. totally backwards, right? Ignorance is bliss in that way. Not real bliss, worldly bliss. And worldly bliss is suffering. That's what we need to remember. Worldly happiness is suffering. Doesn't mean we can't appreciate it when we experience it, but if we're seeking it out, it means we're seeking out suffering. Okay? So we shouldn't seek it out. When we experience it for whatever reason, great, we can appreciate it. You know, life is hard. If I can get something that makes my life a little easier, I appreciate it. But I don't grab onto it as if it were real happiness. Because as soon as I do that, then I'm going to be disappointed because I'm grabbing on to thin air. It's like trying to hold water in your hands, right? No matter how tight your fists are, you can't keep hold of water. It's always going to drain through. In the same way, if I expect worldly happiness to bring me real relief from suffering, I'm always going to be disappointed. I'll have a moment of bliss and then it'll disappear. And it'll make my suffering more pronounced because I'm comparing it to this worldly happiness. So, yes, there are growing pains in our practice.
Venerable,
Yes,
venerable.
yes.
So yes, I agree. I see what you're saying, that ignorance is worldly bliss, and you've also said so many times that that the Buddha was so courageous, and but sometimes it just gets really hard because the whole world, and not just our present times, for thousands of years, people have believed that worldly bliss is how you should, better the worldly bliss and happier your life should be. So sometimes it gets a bit sort of confusing. And of course,
Mm.
one has to remind oneself, but it just sometimes I feel that, oh, so you mean for thousands of years, millions, billions of people have just got it all wrong? They have, I know, but sometimes it just sort of yeah it's it
I
just
understand what you're saying. It feels
yeah
very strange to say, like,
yeah
how do we have this secret knowledge that billions or trillions of, never mind all sentient beings, just humans, right? If we ignore all their sentient beings, there have been
yeah.
trillions of humans that have, on Earth alone, never mind other universes, anything like this. Trillions of humans have done it wrong. How do we have this secret knowledge, right? Like that. And it feels very presumptuous almost. Like, how do I have it figured out?
Yes, I
Um,
mean it feels so no one else, I mean billions, like you said, trillions haven't realized. Through the ages people haven't realized, and they
mhm.
haven't, but it yeah yeah
So the answer to that is the reason that the world as we understand it came about is due to ignorance and the afflictions, and is due to karma. It's the collective karma of sentient beings that caused the earth to be formed the way it is for us to live on this earth, in this planet, in this way. And so the trillions of lives that have been born again and again on our earth alone are all born due to karma and delusion, including us, right? As long as we're trapped in samsara. So our experience of the world is marked by samsara, by the cycle of suffering. And so there have been, just as there have been trillions of beings who have suffered and who don't understand, there have been just as many who are working to be free from that suffering, right? We all want to be free from suffering. But due to our ignorance, it is very easy to be distracted and to not understand what is actually causing suffering and what's causing happiness. That's the whole reason that we took birth in samsara in the first place, again and again and again. That's the whole reason that our experience of the world, of Jambudvipa as it is, has come about, right? So the idea that it's not useful to think I know something that others don't know. This kind of presumptuous, conceited attitude isn't really useful, right? Because it can lead to vanity and to ego. But it is useful to see people have been suffering since time immemorial, and I recognize in the teachings of the Buddha a way to be free from that suffering. And I recognize that not everyone has access to these, yet people have been practicing spiritual paths forever, and some with more conviction or more generosity of spirit than others. But I'm following in a lineage of practice that supersedes Shakyamuni Buddha, right? Shakyamuni Buddha is only one Buddha. There are other Buddhas that taught before Shakyamuni Buddha. I'm participating in a lineage of spiritual practice that recognize that there is a path out of this suffering. And it's true that many trillions of beings have been caught so deeply in their own ignorance and their own suffering that they have not pursued that path in a meaningful way. That's not a reason for me to think that I'm better than them, but it is a reason for me to rejoice that I have finally found a spiritual path that's meaningful, and then to do everything I can to help others find that path as well, which isn't to say proselytizing Buddhism, but doing whatever it is that I'm able to help them relieve their suffering, right? Um, but I agree. You know, that's why we talk about when we talk about a perfect human rebirth and meeting the Dharma, how incredibly rare it is. All of the examples we're given are metaphors to show how unimaginably rare it is to not only be born as a human, to be born as a human with a proclivity to engage in spiritual practice and at a time and a place where the teachings of the Buddha have prospered and we have access to them. All those conditions are wildly, wildly rare. And so instead of looking at them and saying these make me, more fortunate than others, you say I have, or make me better than others. You should say I have the fortune to experience this, and so I'm not going to waste it, right? So that should encourage us to not waste all these resources that we have and realize how valuable they are.
Yes, thank you, Venerable.
I agree, though. When you take a step back, it can be a little bit overwhelming, and you say, "Wait a second, how is it that that everyone is seeking out suffering?" But for me, I just look at the people around me, and of course, I don't know what's in others' minds. I can only judge by their external actions, right? So, like, everyone else could be Buddhas who are just putting on a show for my benefit. That's possible, but you can generally have an idea from people's external actions and their external statements what their nature of their mind is a little bit, right? And I look at people who are seeking out worldly happiness only, and I see how disappointed they are and how they never have enough and that they always want the next big thing. And all that is doing is leading to them craving more and more and more, but never feeling satisfied. And I can see that people I know in my life and in, people in the news and public figures, I can see people that have far more resources than I do in terms of fiscal resources or, things that are available to them, and all of their wealth, all their money, all their power doesn't do anything but make them want more, and they seem miserable. Like they seem absolutely miserable. Like I would not want to be trapped in their mind for a moment, right? So I can see that in the people that I have access to in this life alone. And so I use that as the to help encourage my practice because I see that these people have all of these things that I spent my whole life wanting, and it didn't bring them happiness. Therefore, why would it bring me happiness? And therefore, I need to find another path. And the Buddha is offering that path to me, right? Okay, with that in mind, maybe we should jump into the text. Um, just reminding ourselves that our suffering isn't from our lack of resources and it isn't from the world around us, but it's from our own mind. That's the most important thing to remember. And in this section of the text, we're specifically looking at the practice of introspection. So if you remember, Shantideva, who was alive in the 8th century, and he was a monk at Nalanda Monastery, and this is one of his his two texts that he's left us. And this text, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, is divided into 3 sections. Okay, the well, it's divided into 10 chapters, but of those 10 chapters, we have 3 sections. The first section is the first 3 chapters, which is how to develop bodhicitta, the mind that wishes to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. Right. The next section is how to protect that bodhicitta from degenerating, how to preserve it, okay, how to protect it. And then the final section is how to increase that bodhicitta, how to cause it to proliferate. And then the last chapter is on a dedication of merit. So the first 3 chapters are all about generating bodhicitta. The next 3 chapters, 4, 5, and 6, are how to protect that bodhicitta. And then the final ones, 7, 8, and 9, are how to increase it. So we're on chapter 5 right now. Chapters 4 and 5 work together to teach us the practice of morality or ethical discipline, right? The practice of generosity, which is the first of the 6 perfections, was taught in chapters 2 and 3. And then starting in chapter 6, which is the chapter on patience, the remaining perfections each get their own chapter. So patience, joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom each get their own chapter, 6, 7, 8, and 9. 4 and 5 are combined to teach us about moral discipline. And this chapter especially, it started by reminding us how powerful the mind is and that all of our suffering comes from the mind and that the untamed elephant mind is our most dangerous enemy, right? That the untamed mind, the mind that is wild and out of control, is much more dangerous than any external enemy we could think of. So that's how this chapter started. And so then introspection itself is combined with mindfulness they aren't virtuous necessarily. What they are mental factors that are allowing us to perceive our mind, our motivation, and what we're doing. So they are the tools we use to then recognize how we're going about the world and then to realign our behavior to align with what we know is virtuous and what we know is beneficial. So introspection itself isn't enough, right? Introspection is merely the tool that lets us see into our mind, right? To keep tabs on what's going on. So we need to then, once we develop introspection, we use introspection and mindfulness. So mindfulness being the mental factor that remembers whatever object it's focused on. In meditation practice, that might be meditating on the breath or on an image of the Buddha or whatever you may be meditating on in a meditation practice. In your everyday life, your mindfulness should be always attached to virtue and to be trying to remember virtuous objects. And then introspection is another mental factor that's constantly watching itself, is watching your own mind to say, am I actually paying attention to virtuous objects? Am I motivated by bodhicitta or by compassion? Or is my self-cherishing mind sneaking in and doing all of these, unsavory actions behind the scenes? So our mindfulness and introspection, once we understand their role, then we actually have to use them to guard our mind and to practice our mind and to practice morality. So when we talk about morality or ethical discipline, there are three types that we talk about. The first type is the ethical discipline of restraint, right? So this is avoiding non-virtuous activities. So all of the vows we hold, whether they be pratimoksha vows or bodhisattva vows or tantric vows, those all fall into the category of the ethics of or the ethical discipline of restraint. So not engaging in non-virtue, actively seeking to avoid non-virtue, not just accidentally not engaging in it, but actively seeking out the avoidance of non-virtuous behavior of body, speech, and mind. That is practicing the morality or the ethical discipline of restraint. And that's the section we're on right now. The other type of, there are two more types of ethical discipline. The second one is the ethical discipline of gathering virtuous activities or gathering virtue in general, right? And then the third one is the ethical discipline of working for the benefit or for the welfare of other sentient beings. And so in the remainder of this chapter, I don't know if we'll get to it today or not, but those other two types of ethical discipline are each talked about, how mindfulness and introspection also are harnessed in the effort to practice not just the morality of restraint, but also the morality of gathering virtue and the morality of working for the benefit of other sentient beings. So we, at this point, are on verse 48. And now 48 is the extensive explanation of the sections that came earlier. And so it might be useful to jump back to the beginning of that section. This section is how to guard your mind through mindfulness and introspection, and how to use mindfulness and introspection as a way to practice the ethics of restraint, right? That is the section we're on. And the beginning of this section we talked last week, and that's verse 34, right? And I said we were going to get to the expensive version of it. We didn't get to it last week. But 34 says, when, just as I am about to act, I see that my mind is tainted with defilement, at such time I should remain unmovable like a piece of wood, right? And now here I reminded us that a piece of wood here isn't like some inert dead thing lying on the side of the path. Here, the idea of a piece of wood we should envision like a tree, like the trunk of a tree, something that is stable, something that is rooted, something that is strong, is profound, right? So when I say I'm going to remain like a piece of wood, it doesn't mean like I'm going to be this non-committal dead thing lying on the side of the road. It means that I am going to have stability and strength and immovability in that way. And so what the condensed version here is saying is that before I engage in any action of body, speech, and mind, I should see what is motivating that action and make sure that it is not an affliction, make sure it is not a defilement. And if it is, then instead of acting on that defilement, I should do nothing. I should just take a step back. Now, again, this isn't encouraging us being passive. It's us recognizing that acting out of a defiled mind or a defiled intention is worse than doing nothing, right? Because it's creating suffering for ourselves and others. So this isn't saying be passive. This is saying always check your motivation. And if your motivation isn't correct, then don't act on inappropriate motivations. So this is the kind of summary verse. And so now we can go to verse 48, which is where we begin a more extensive explanation of this topic. A lot of these verses, like I said, are really pithy and really direct. So we might be able to go through a few of them, quite a few of them today, because I don't know how much commentary is needed on them. But if I'm going too quickly, interrupt me. And if there are any questions, of course, you can interrupt. Whenever there is attachment in my mind, and whenever there is the desire to be angry, I should do nothing, nor say anything, but remain like a piece of wood, right? If we haven't examined our mind, if we haven't actively cultivated introspection, how will we know if we're acting out of attachment or acting out of anger? So that's why we start by looking at our mind. We have to understand, where are these reactionary emotions coming from and how are they infiltrating my everyday activities. So if you don't do the work to look at your mind and motivation, then you won't realize that you're acting out of a harmful defilement, right? So the first step is, we have to actively recognize what's going on in our mind. Eventually, we want to prevent any of these defilements from occurring at all. We want to uproot them. We want to totally eliminate them. But before we do that, first we should at least be able to identify them. So I might still experience attachment or anger, but I won't act on it, right? So being able to recognize it and not act on it is a huge improvement in my everyday life. Because how many years have I spent in my life acting blindly out of attachment and anger and not realizing it until afterward, if I realize it at all, right? So being able to totally uproot attachment and anger and ignorance is obviously our goal. But until we reach that, we should at least be able to recognize it and prevent ourselves from acting out of a defiled mind. So here we reference attachment and anger in this verse. We say the three root poisons are ignorance, attachment, and anger, or ignorance, lust or desire, and hatred. Uh, they all are kind of synonyms in that way. Really, ignorance, misunderstanding the nature of reality, and grasping onto a self as if it truly exists, self a person and self a phenomena, is the real root of samsara. And attachment and anger both come from that, but they're considered the roots, the three poisons as well, because they're so, even though they do come from ignorance, they're so primal and so central to all the other afflictive minds that they're considered root poisons as well. So here is pointing out those two. Whenever there's attachment in my mind, or whenever there is the desire to be angry, when I recognize that, then instead of acting on it, I should not do anything. I should not say anything. I take a step back. So that is how to deal with recognizing attachment or anger. Now, the next two verses are talking about when we recognize mental excitement, right? Or mental agitation. Whenever I have distracted thoughts, the wish to verbally belittle, feelings of self-importance or self-satisfaction, when I have the intention to describe the faults of others, pretension, and the thought to deceive others, whenever I am eager for praise, or have the desire to blame others, whenever I have the wish to speak harshly or cause dispute, at all such times I should remain like a piece of wood. So here, these are all pretty clear, right? um, when we're trying to develop single pointed concentration, our two big obstacles are a mind of agitation or excitement and a mind of lethargy or dullness. Now, to meditation, both of those are much more prone to agitation and excitement, right? And when they happen, we're no longer paying attention to our mind. We're no longer seeking out a pure motivation, but we're like a wild monkey going from branch to branch to branch, not paying attention. Okay. So when I have the thought to verbally belittle others, when my first instinct is to build up my own ego by speaking poorly of others, by criticizing others, by putting others down. And it's due to having this experience of self-importance, right? Or self-satisfaction. I know more than them. I understand this topic better than them. They don't understand it as clearly as me. Then when that's my motivation, I shouldn't do anything. When my motivation is pretense or the thought to deceive others, to fool others, to be manipulative, right? When I'm seeking out praise, when I'm seeking out compliments, when I'm not doing something because I really want to help someone, but because I want them to praise me, none of these things are benefiting me or benefiting others. So we can see all of these, every line of these two verses are pointing out different ways the self-cherishing mind sneaks into our everyday activity. The self-cherishing mind says, my happiness is more important than your happiness. My own profit, my own pleasure, my own praise, my own prosperity, my own, popularity. Those are what are most important. And avoiding discomfort, avoiding loss, avoiding critique or criticism, avoiding infamy or unpopularity, those are also more important. So anything I do to meet one of those worldly aims is worthwhile. That's what the self-cherishing mind tells us. And what this verse is saying, whenever you recognize any of those minds operating as the motivation for your actions, then you should just stop your actions right away. You do nothing. You should remain like a piece of wood, solid, contemplative, stable, but um, not following those negative minds. If we go on to the next verse, it continues exploring the eight worldly concerns and the way the self-cherishing mind infiltrates our life. Whenever I have the desire for material gain, for honor, for fame, whenever I seek attendance or a circle of friends, when in my mind I wish to be served, at all these times I should remain like a piece of wood. The previous verses are showing the ways we treat others, right? When I'm belittling to others, when I critique others, when I do something that is actively um, relating to others. This verse is saying, what about myself? When I'm seeking out those things just for myself, right? So it's showing that both in the ways we act in relation to others and we react in relation to ourselves can both be serving the self-cherishing mind. And it doesn't benefit anyone in either of those cases. These kind of verses I find really helpful in my life because how often is it easy to get lost in a self-cherishing mind? And even just to remind myself, when I see that I'm doing something just because I want someone to say, oh, good job, I'm looking for the approval of others. If I can notice that, I can just tell myself, be like a piece of wood, remain like a piece of wood, right? Just that one little line can bring back my whole practice of this text. So by studying this text, by being familiar with this text, by bringing this text into your meditative practice, by contemplating it, developing conviction in what it's saying, and meditating on it so it becomes more familiar to you, then in your everyday life, you can just remind yourself, be like a piece of wood. And that brings back this whole text, this whole practice that you've cultivated, right? So you can use little lines like that, whether it's a whole verse or even a line from the verse, to bring you right back to the mental and emotional headspace that you have developed in your practice. That's one way to bring your meditation practice into your everyday life by just having, these little mantras almost that remind you, oh, that's right. I am actively working to tame my mind. I am actively working to pursue virtue. I am actively cultivating introspection. Act like a piece of wood. If my first instinct is to say something else, my first instinct is to criticize, to be sarcastic, to put someone down, be like a piece of wood. Mm. And, this isn't to say you should just like walk around your office and not say anything to your coworkers and be silent all the time. But it is saying that you should be more intentional about how you engage in your relationships with others, whether it be your family, your friends, your coworkers, your enemies, whoever they may be. You should allow that intentionality to be what is your priority and make sure that every one of your interactions is motivated by the wish to benefit others and not motivated by any of the eight worldly concerns or anything that is related to the self-cherishing mind. So the next two verses talk about the same thing as well, right?
Venerable,
Whenever, yes.
sorry. So, every time this word attachment comes in with my immediate family members, um, there's always this contradiction on attachment versus affection. So, though of course there's nothing like non-virtuous coming out of that affection, but, I always get confused because there obviously you need affection, but I don't know at what line on the edge is it towards attachment where, I want something done for their benefit coming out of
Yeah, yeah.
affection, but I feel it's also attachment to my views. So I always have this dilemma, and then I get kind of rogered by the family members saying that, why are you doing this? If you really care
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
person, let the person go. Let the person decide. And I'm talking about my nephews and nieces who are like in their 20s, so they're not like toddlers. But can you throw some light? I don't know. I always
Yeah,
get
yeah. So
blamed.
there's a couple different things, right, that you bring up. One, I mean, so the first thing is that we're often told that we should develop love for all sentient beings that's equal to a mother the way she loves her only child. So the attachment or the affection we have for our family is useful, but we have to remember that we should try to cultivate a similar affection for all sentient beings. That's one thing. That's not quite what you're talking about, but it is something to remember, that the affection we have for those that we're close to, that instinctual affection is something we should be cultivating to all sentient beings without discrimination, right? So, on one hand, that affection is especially useful to remind us that this is how I should be feeling about everyone, not just those people that I'm close to. That's one thing. The next thing, the distinction here between affection and attachment, and also the idea of love and loving kindness and attachment, and where lust and attachment get mixed in with love and with compassion and with affection. Most of our worldly affection, whether it be for our family members or for our partners or for our friends, there is some level of expectation that goes along with it, that we expect something from them, right? Maybe not explicitly, but we have some sort of self-interest in that affection. And we derive some sort of pleasure, worldly pleasure, out of what we get from that relationship with those other people, right? And it is that mixture of attachment and love that's the problem. So our affection for the people we care about is genuine, but it's often mixed with attachment, with the belief that if I do these things, then I'm going to get something in response, that I have expectations due to the way I am offering myself to them, or way I am giving them advice, or way I'm doing these, whatever it may be, right? So there's nothing wrong with affection. We need to cultivate affection, but we have to see, is this affection really unbiased? Is this affection really coming from a place of selflessness, or do I expect something in response? And, we're in a culture where, aunties and uncles are expected to be respected by their juniors, right? So there is some level of having our family members that should show some devotion to us, right? Just because that's the culture we're in. And yet when they don't, do we get upset? Do we say they're behaving inappropriately? When our children or our siblings or our family members don't treat us the way we expect them to, does that cause us to have moments of frustration with them, right? And does that affect our affection toward them? And so for most of us, we'd say, even the people we have our strongest genuine affection for, it's still going to be mixed in with some sort of attachment. And if they're our romantic partner, then it's often mixed in with lust as well and these other kind of worldly minds. But if they're not a romantic partner, if they're just a family member or a close friend, there's going to be some type of clinging that says my happiness is dependent upon this external person. And the reason I have affection for them is because I'm going to get something out of this relationship. Now, that's not necessarily explicit, right? We're not like Machiavellian in the way we're thinking about our relationships with our families, but that's there in the background. So if you can have a genuine relationship with anyone, whether it's family or friends or anyone that doesn't have that, that is based in selflessness, that is genuinely a wish for them to be happy and genuinely a wish for them to be free from suffering, then that is what we're trying to cultivate. And so if you have that with your family members, then that's wonderful. And you shouldn't worry about attachment coming in. But if you ever have a moment when you try to offer some advice or something to your family member and they don't follow up with you, they don't do what you want, and you have that moment of little frustration with them, then it shows that there is still some sort of self-cherishing mixed into your affection. So that's what we have to look out for.
Okay,
Does
thank you.
that
And
help?
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
lot of
I mean,
matter
the
for
truth,
contemplating.
the truth is, when you have that, if we are blessed to be in a situation where we have natural affection towards people in our life, whether it be family or friends, then that is great. And we should look at that as motivation. And we should rejoice in that natural sense of affection and then try to purify it so it isn't mixed with any of the afflictive minds. But then once we do that, we should try to expand it. So it's not focused just on the people we care about, that we care about in our immediate circle, but try to make it wider. And we should realize that is a good model for how we can relate to others, which is why this example comes up again and again, that we should have love for all sentient beings the way a mother loves her only child. And I know that I've experienced in my life, people I know, and just in examples I've seen, real selfless dedication to, especially to children, but also to family members, that people will do anything to go out of their way to help others, especially people they're close to, right? I've seen that. The problem with it, or not problem, but the difficulty is that it's biased because we'll go out of our way and be totally selfless to those people that we already have a relationship with, but we won't do the same for all sentient beings. So we have to be able to look at that and rejoice in it, and then say, how can we expand it? How can we let that motivate us to be in that same type of relation with all sentient beings, not just the people that we have a natural affinity towards, right?
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah. So these next two verses are just, again, reminding us of the different ways self-cherishing can be active in our mind, and the way we need to use introspection to try to always analyze what's going on to prevent it, right? So these are verses 52 and 53. Whenever I have the wish to decrease or to stop working for others, and the desire to pursue my own welfare alone, if motivated by such thoughts, a wish to say something occurs, then at these times I should remain like a piece of wood. Whenever I have impatience, or laziness, or cowardice, shamelessness, and the desire to talk nonsense, if thoughts of partiality arise, at these times too, I should remain like a piece of wood. So, these verses are again reminding us that our self-cherishing can sneak into all of our activities. It can sneak into our affection to loved ones, right? Because it sneaks in with in the view of partiality, of saying these people are deserving of my love and attention, and these people are not deserving of my love and attention. Okay, that's the self-cherishing mind. That's the afflictive mind coming in. These people are worthy of me practicing patience and putting up with their nonsense, and these people aren't, right? Whenever I have those minds, I need to do whatever I can to stop them. And now, this line in verse 52, it says, when I am, sometimes these thoughts don't actually catalyze external action. But if they do, I should take a moment to say, wait a second, how am I allowing these afflictions to motivate me? And how am I allowing myself to follow after suffering as if it were going to bring me happiness, right? So we cultivate mindfulness and we cultivate introspection for the purpose of guarding our mind, of watching why it is we're doing what we're doing, and to make sure that our actions are aligned with the spiritual values that we have developed conviction in, right? So that conviction doesn't come just because the Buddha taught it. It doesn't come just because some random monk from Sarah J is saying it out loud. It comes from us studying the texts, or hearing the advice of our teachers, and then us contemplating it and recognizing the benefit and the validity of those teachings. That's how we have to develop conviction. We don't develop conviction just by hearing someone say it out loud, right? There's not blind faith. There is aspirational faith and there is confidence, but that comes from experience and from study and from contemplation. And our mindfulness and our introspection then allow us to take that conviction and put it into practice, right? So the next verse is a summary of everything we just discussed. And the next verse says, having in this way examined his mind for disturbing conceptions and for thoughts that strive for meaningless things, the courageous Bodhisattva should hold his mind steady through the application of the remedial forces. So all of these previous verses, which shows different types of afflicted minds that can be motivating us without us realizing it. Introspection and mindfulness, if we practice them, will allow us to recognize those afflictive minds, those unhealthy motivations. And our first reaction to them should be to be like a piece of wood, to just not act on those unhealthy minds. But then the next reaction to them would be to practice the remedial forces, which is to say the antidotes, right? To try to practice the opposite, to not just stop ourselves from acting on the harmful minds, but to prevent those harmful minds from ever arising in the first place. And, it's possible to notice yourself being involved in some afflicted mind, right? Say I'm overwhelmed by attachment. I can recognize that, and I can, act like a piece of wood. I cannot say or act in such a way that is allowing myself to follow that attachment. But that attachment is still there, right? I need to do something to subdue that attachment and eventually uproot it entirely. But in the moment, I have to be able to subdue it. So it's not constantly running in circles around my mind, right? So the first action is to recognize it. Once you recognize it, then you immediately stop so you don't pursue it blindly. And then you actually have to practice some sort of antidote that allows it to be conquered or subdued, right? So those are different steps in the process. And so here it's saying, once I have recognized all of these different types of afflictive minds, and I've done the work of preventing myself from actively following them, now I have to apply the antidotes that allow me to then subdue them, so they're not there anymore, right? And so it's not that we're just seeking out to avoid active harm. We're also trying to avoid passive harm, or passive non-virtue, right? Um, so that could mean, for instance, avoiding laziness. Laziness is a very passive non-virtue, right? But it also can mean just allowing ourselves to always have afflictive minds active, running in circles, is going to make it much harder to live a virtuous life. So if we can practice the different types of antidotes, then we can have moments that are generally motivated by um, peaceful minds, by virtuous minds, by compassion, by bodhicitta, right? By genuine wish to benefit others. It's hard to have those virtuous minds simultaneous with the afflicted minds. Sometimes you can, depending on the minds. There are some minds that are opposite, that you can't have them manifest at the same time. You can't have a mind of love and a mind of anger simultaneously, right? Because a mind of anger is a mind that wishes to harm others, and a mind of love is the mind that wishes to bring others happiness and the causes of happiness. So you can't have both of those simultaneous, in your continuum. And so for that reason, actively meditating on love is a way to subdue the mind of anger. If you notice that you have anger active in your continuum, then you look at the object of that anger and try to generate a mind of love for that object. It's impossible to look at a single object and simultaneously want to harm it and want it to have every happiness and cause of happiness, right? So one way to subdue anger is to think of its antidote, which is love, or loving kindness. And in that way, we try to ensure that the most active minds are the minds that subdue all of our afflictive minds, that bring virtue and bring about healthy, holistic activities that lead us and others to freedom from suffering. Right? So then the next section, the next few verses, 55 through 58, are talking about how do we actually bring about the different antidotes, right? So verses 55 and 56 are how to bring about individual antidotes. 57 is the general antidote for all of our afflictive minds. And then 58 is how to practice those. And again, this isn't incredibly deep philosophy. It's pretty common sense kind of teaching, which is, I think, part of the reason this text is so celebrated is because it is, a lot of it, very common sense. Now, a lot of it is common sense, but common sense that we haven't heard before, or common sense that is shocking to us because we are so mired in our worldly understanding of the world and our worldly perception and seeking out the delights of samsara. That when we're given common sense that contradicts the eight worldly concerns, it doesn't always feel like common sense, right? Especially in chapter 6, trying to overcome anger. Some of the advice on anger. We're so used to anger and thinking of it as a motivating force that can help us, that when we are taught techniques of how destructive anger is, it may seem like the opposite of common sense because we're so habituated to celebrating our anger, celebrating our own misery. But aside from that, there is so much very easily applicable common sense in this text. And so these next verses, I think, they're just very easy to understand. They're very, very commonsensical. So 55 and 56 go together as the verses that are teaching us about individual, individual antidotes, right? So being very resolute and faithful, being steady, respectful, polite, with a sense of shame, being apprehensive and peaceful, I should strive to make others happy. I should not be disheartened by all the whims of the childish who are in discord with one another, and I should know them to arise in their minds due to disturbing conceptions, and therefore I should be kind towards them. So these are pointing out different individual antidotes to different negative, afflictive minds that may be motivating us in one way or another. Okay, so in verse 55, we have being very resolute, being faithful. So this is showing that having conviction to your spiritual path and recognizing that even it may be inconvenient because it may not be aligning with your worldly desires at the moment, but being resolute and confident in your understanding of the Dharma, being faithful, which isn't to say being faithful to a person, but being faithful to the Dharma, being faithful to your spiritual practice, right? Being steady, not allowing yourself to be disturbed by the immediate circumstances, allowing yourself to be like a tree that is rooted, that is stable, that isn't moving, that, can survive a windstorm without falling down because it is stable and rooted to the ground in that way, right? Though I will say, we had a really beautiful mango tree in my yard a couple years ago, and there was a big rain during the monsoon season, and the whole mango tree fell down. So maybe trees aren't as steady as I'd like to believe them to be, but we had a 10-meter tall mango tree, and the whole thing it fell down. But that's okay. What to do? There are plenty of mangoes elsewhere. So maybe that's not the best example, but the point is we should be steady, right? And this is an antidote because so much of our mind is, or so many of our afflictions come from this agitation, the mental agitation that can't stay still, that has to move, that has to be constantly um, um, jumping from one object of attachment to another, that can't stay steady or still. It's part of the reason that just cultivating single point of concentration is such a useful practice in the 21st century, especially because we are so overwhelmed by the attention economy that our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and we need more and more hits of uh, of TikTok and whatever it may be to get us paying attention to things. And so, being able to cultivate capacity to appreciate silence and stillness is really, really important. And this idea of being steady is part and parcel with that. Being able to be comfortable without having constant, how do you say, distractions, right? How many people do you know these days? I mean, we've gotten so accustomed to it, we've done it to ourselves, but wherever they go, if they have to wait for 5 minutes, they take out their phone. And they have to be scrolling or looking at something. They can't just sit for 5 minutes. If you're at a doctor's office and you're waiting for the doctor to call you, you can't sit for 5 minutes and wait. You have to be looking at your phone and doing something, And it's not like you're doing important work. Some people may be, but no, it's just you need distraction. Because to sit with your own mind for 5 minutes is terrifying, right? Because we are a culture that is terrified of looking at our own minds and looking at the consequences of our own behavior. And therefore, we need to be constantly distracted from ourselves. So, one of the antidotes to following the afflictive mind is being steady, right? Being calm, being able to appreciate stillness and silence and sit with yourself in a comfortable way, right? Being respectful and polite. Again, common sense. Treat others the way you want to be treated, even if they aren't kind to you, even if you don't know them. Just be polite to them. Be respectful of others. Be respectful of their needs, of their time, of their well-being, right? Of their boundaries. Have a sense of shame and a sense of be apprehensive and peaceful. So a sense of shame is the wish to not engage in non-virtue because you know that engaging in non-virtue will only lead suffering to yourself and others. So the sense of shame and embarrassment are the minds that protect you from engaging in non-virtue because you don't want to have to develop regret. You don't want to ever regret your actions, right? So shame prevents that. Be apprehensive. Here, apprehensive, it means don't jump into things without thinking. Always take your time. Be considerate. Be peaceful. Have a demeanor that is pleasant to be around. There are people who, as soon as they walk into a room, everyone just calms down or everyone feels better, right? I'm sure you've met people like that. And they may not be Buddhists. They may just be random people who, due to their natural disposition, they walk into a room and without saying anything, everyone just goes, oh, that's nice that they're here. You want to be one of those people, right? That's who you want to be in the world, is someone who can walk into a space and make everyone feel better by your presence, okay? And that doesn't mean you have to have some amazing spiritual realizations. It just means you cultivate a demeanor of kindness and cultivate a demeanor that says, I care about you, whoever you are. I want you to be happy. And if you can cultivate that demeanor, then no matter where you are, you help ease others' minds. Even if they don't know you, even if you don't have deep conversations with them, just being that type of person in the world is meaningful, right? And the most important part about it is you're not doing it because you want people to like you. You're doing it because you genuinely want them to be happy. You genuinely aren't concerned with your own happiness, you're concerned with theirs. And so what that does is it helps align all of your actions with virtue. It helps align all of your actions with bodhicitta. And it helps prevent the self-cherishing mind from digging in and taking root, right?
Venerable, one question, sorry.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I I felt there was a very thin line being a people pleaser versus somebody who's going to make everybody happy and comfortable. Can you?
Yes, no,
I'm
no,
a
you're
little,
right.
yeah, it's a little confusing for me because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, for all
It comes
the,
down to motivation. 100% it comes down to motivation. And so, well, first off, there are people pleasers that are just like obsequious, who it doesn't seem like they actually have any confidence in what they're saying, that they're just saying the words that people want to hear because they want to be liked, right? So when I think of the term people pleaser, what we mean by that, at least in a conventional sense, is not that I actually want others to be happy, but I want others to like me. The reason I'm a people pleaser is because I want them to think kindly of me. So I'm going to say yes to whatever they say, whether that means I'm being sycophantic or obsequious or whatever it may be. That's what I think of when I think of being a people pleaser. Not actually concerned about others' happiness and well being, but concerned about how they view me, how they think about me. And as opposed to actually wanting them to be happy and going out of my way to do whatever is in my capacity to bring them joy and happiness and to prevent their suffering, where the focus isn't on what they think of me, but instead is focused on them. So, to some extent, from the outside, the actions may be very similar, right? It may look like I'm doing the same thing, whether I am giving advice or giving gifts or going out of my way to like give them rides or whatever it may be, right? I'm helping them out in some way. From the outside, it may look the same, but I know my motivation and intention. And so I have to make sure that why am I going about this activity? Is it because I actually care about their happiness, or is it because I care about what they think of me and they think that I'm such a good friend and they think that I'm such a good person, right? So that is where the distinction is with the motivation. And I'm sure, at least I've met people in my life who seem like the kind of uncouth term we use is a brown noser, right? Like all they're doing is going out of their way to make people see how nice they are, and it doesn't feel genuine. There doesn't feel like there's any sense of authenticity in their behavior because all they're seeking is to be complimented and to be praised and to be the top of the list to get favors. That's what it seems like, right? And so that is what I think of when I think of people pleasing. Now, of course, we also there's also a way that we respond to the traumas of our experience by trying to please people as a way to protect ourselves, right? That's another category of it, especially people that grew up in abusive or traumatic experiences with family members or parents or loved ones. They may go out of their way to be people pleasers because it's a self-defense mechanism, right? Because you're used to if I can preempt you from getting angry, then that protects me, right? So we see a lot of people that are in abusive relationships become people pleasers because even when they exit those abusive relationships, they still have this habit of being a people pleaser because that's a self-defense mechanism. That's understandable, right? Because we're trying to navigate a very difficult world and especially traumatic experiences. But what's important as someone who's practicing those things is to always look at the motivation. And it may be that my tendency to people please is born out of my own past or my own traumatic experience, my own trying to avoid conflict or suffering in my life. They may be where it is born out of. But can I take that and transform it into something that is no longer about seeking my own freedom from discomfort and instead seeking to bring comfort to others? So can I take that habitual tendency and transform it into something virtuous, right? So not all people pleasing comes from a place of manipulation, is what I'm trying to say. There can be many different motivating factors, but as long as it's focused on my own happiness and my own people praising me or not going out of their way to harm me, right? If I'm only people pleasing because I don't want to be harmed, then that's focusing on the happiness of this life, you know. And again, sometimes that's what we have to do. As I often talk about, the Dharma doesn't say if you're in an abusive relationship, you should say, well, this is my karma and my suffering comes from my mind, therefore it's okay for me to be abused. No, take the steps you need to extricate yourself from difficult circumstances, but recognize that ultimately your suffering comes from your mind. And if you need to take actions to help remediate the external circumstances, then you should do that. The Dharma isn't encouraging us to stay in difficult circumstances just for the sake of it if we have the means to be free of them, right? We're not being passive. We're not just passively accepting what's going on, but we're taking the transformative action that Dharma is compelling us to take. So the difference for me between people pleasing and trying to make others happy is about motivation. Am I motivated, concerned with myself or with others? Does that help?
Sure, thank you.
It is a fine line, though. I agree. Especially because we might have the best motivation. I mean, that's the danger of self-cherishing, right? Is that it's not self-cherishing isn't black and white. When you study self-cherishing and you study mind training, especially, they talk about There's the white activities, which are totally free from self-cherishing, and then the black activities, which are totally motivated only by self-cherishing, and then the vast majority of our activities, which are mixed, right? That is going to have some positive intention and motivation, but is slightly mixed as well. So most of our activities are mixed in that way, right? So that's the purpose of developing introspection, is so we can actively look at our mind and say, what are all of the most subtle motivations encouraging this behavior, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can finish this section, I think. Yeah, we have time. So just going over verse 56 really quickly. I should not be disheartened by the whims of the childish who are in discord with one another. A lot of the language in the Dharma talks about the childish or the foolish. Basically, anyone that is working for their own ends, and anyone that is actively following the self-cherishing mind is referred to as childish or foolish. And the reason for that is because just like a child doesn't know what's best for them, someone who is seeking out worldly delights, seeking out the pleasures of samsara, but believes that it's going to be long-lasting happiness, then in the same way a child seeks out immediate gratification and doesn't know what's best for them, that's how most sentient beings operate. That's how I've lived most of my life, and that's how everyone has lived most of their life. So here it's saying that when there are people that are overwhelmed by suffering, and due to their suffering, due to their ignorance, they act in such a way that causes my own unhappiness, that causes disturbances to my life. Instead of being upset with them, I should recognize that they're acting out of suffering, that they're acting due to their own ignorance, due to their own disturbing conceptions. And when I recognize that, sorry, this is not clear. There we go. When I recognize that they're acting out of their own disturbing conceptions, that is due to their own suffering and their misunderstanding of reality that cause them to cause harm to me, then how could I be upset with them? When I see that all they're doing is bringing about more suffering for themselves, how could I actually be upset with them? You know, the all the commentary, many of the commentaries on this text at this point, they cite a verse from Aryadeva's 400 verses, where he says, just as a physician would not argue with a patient who is possessed by demons, even if they're angry, in the same way, Shakyamuni does not argue with a person overwhelmed by afflictions, but with the afflictions themselves. And what that means is, what that's pointing to, is when I recognize that all of others' harmful actions are due to their being afflicted by suffering, why would I be upset with them? I should be upset with the suffering. I should be upset with the cause of their harmful actions. The actual cause of their harmful actions is their suffering. Whether they frame it that way or not is not my concern, right? But the truth is, when people engage in harmful actions, when they engage in hateful actions, it's because they want to be happy, they don't want to suffer, and they don't understand the appropriate actions to take that'll bring about genuine happiness. They think that by harming me, or by being greedy, or by being selfish, they're going to bring about happiness. And so, out of these confused and afflicted minds, they engage in harmful activity, and all they end up doing is bringing more suffering to themselves and to others. So when I experience that, instead of being upset with them, I should be upset with their suffering. And that means I should develop compassion for them. That's the appropriate response when someone harms me, is to have a mind of compassion that says, I wish you didn't have the suffering that is causing you to think that this is an appropriate course of behavior. That is what we are called to do, right? And so this is saying, when they are childish, when I should not be disheartened when others cause harm to me, right? When others follow their worldly desires, and as so doing, they cause disruptions to my peace of mind, because there's no point in being upset with the individual people. I should be upset with the suffering and the ignorance that is their motivation, that is the motivating factors. Yeah, go ahead.
Venerable, yes, it's a little controversial. Doing this, occasionally, sometimes, rarely, sometimes is all right. But when it is somebody, close to you, and this is becoming a pattern, it's a little hard to, yes, it's the right thing to do, but how do I practice this better?
Yeah. So it does depend on who we're talking about, right? If this is someone that you live with and that you have constant, you can't avoid being in relationship with them, right? Again, it depends on that relationship. If there's a power and dominance where you don't have the ability to leave that relationship and you're under their control, then you have to um, engage in the most appropriate behavior that is going to keep you safe in both body and mind. If you're in a type of relationship where you can give advice, where you can encourage people to engage in different behavior, then you have to see the best way about doing that, you know? And often, like I know for my example, for my life rather, no one else in my family is Buddhist. And if I ever want to give them advice, if I use Buddhist language to do so, most of them won't be receptive to it because it doesn't interest them, right? Um, some of my family would, but not all of them. And especially, for instance, my mother, when I was taking care of her as she was dying, she did not want advice from anyone. And the fact that I have hospice training, that I've worked in hospitals, that this is the work I do, the fact that my sister is a therapist and has literally training to do this, she doesn't want any of our help because she says, I'm not your client, I'm not your student, don't treat me like one. So we would watch her engage in all these behaviors. And yes, she was dying of cancer, which is a really awful way to be. But she was making her suffering a lot worse by catastrophizing things, right? And if she was one of my students or if she was one of my sister's clients, we could have given her advice that would have potentially helped lessen her suffering. But she wouldn't listen to it, right? So we had to find ways to meet her needs as best we could that wasn't explicitly calling on our own, Buddhist language or therapist language, and instead trying to push her in the direction where she wasn't causing as much grief and suffering for herself and for those around her. And that's hard to do, right? Especially when people aren't receptive to it. So you have to see what your circumstances are. And so that was obviously a circumstance where I was very dedicated to help my mother to the best of my ability. I wasn't going to leave her. I wasn't going to abandon her. So that meant putting up with her suffering and the way that suffering, she took it out on me and the way she acted really horribly to those around her. But it's very easy for us to see, like, you're miserable. And so it's due to your misery and your fear that you're treating us so horribly. It was very easy to see that, right? And so it was very easy not to ever become upset with her because it was very clear that she was acting out of a very scared and suffering place. But since I'd already dedicated myself that I was going to be of service to her the best I could, then I had to devise ways that I could meet her needs without using Buddhist language, without trying to give her the impression that I was psychoanalyzing her. And so that meant being creative about how I could offer her help and offer her benefit, both physical benefit and emotional benefit, right? But I was lucky to be in a relationship with her that I could do that. Sometimes we don't have that privilege and we have to extract ourselves from a circumstance because there's no advice we can give. There's nothing we can do that will help mediate their anger, their frustration, and their need to dominate or control. So there isn't an easy answer to this. There is the answer that if we were bodhisattvas, if we were perfected beings, or if we had actually realized bodhicitta, then we would behave in such and such a way, right? And we can see those examples in the teachings. That no matter what they did to me, I would have a mind that wasn't disturbed, that only wished for their benefit, and that would act in such a way. Since we haven't achieved that, we have to find the balance of how can I be in relationship with this person in a way that doesn't encourage them to engage in more harm and doesn't cause me emotional or spiritual distress or physical distress that I don't have the capacity to navigate in a meaningful or healthy way. So, what steps do I have to take? That is trying to live my life as a bodhisattva to the best of my ability. Does that mean I have to remove myself from the situation? Does that mean I have to just ignore certain behaviors they do and not take them personally and accept that they're never going to change in this life because it's not my responsibility to change them and they won't hear it? Does it mean that I can have conversations with them to try to convince them to behave in a different way? Depending on our relationship and the circumstances, we have to navigate different options, right? And we can't always, the ideal life of a bodhisattva isn't one that we can live every moment until we have achieved that level of realization. So we do the best we can with whatever we have. And, depending on the circumstances, that might look differently.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, I don't know if that helps. I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard being in samsara. Okay? It's hard being in samsara. And it's especially hard being in relationships with people who you care about, who cause harm to you and to others. And being able to simultaneously care about them and realize that they are harming you and harming themselves is a hard thing to hold. It's a really hard thing to hold. And we have to develop the strategies to learn how we can hold that in a meaningful and healthy way. And it's not going to be one answer to that, unfortunately. There's going to be an idealized answer. And then when we realize that we don't have the capacity to live up to that ideal right now, where we are in our spiritual journey, then we say, how can I always align myself with that ideal to the best of my ability? And that is unfortunately the best we can do, you know? But I say unfortunately, but the flip side of that is, so going back to my own example of dealing with my mother, if I didn't have the decades of spiritual practice that I do rather, and then I had to navigate her dying process, it would have been a lot harder, right? Her reaction, and she got very mean at the end, right? Dealing with that at an emotional level would have been devastating. But the fact that I have done spiritual work and I know what is motivating her to behave in such a way, and therefore I don't ever take it personally, and I realize this is just her expressing her suffering and her fear in the only way that she knows how to, then that allowed me to have compassion for her. And it was only due to my spiritual practice that I was able to do that. So what was a difficult experience would have been a lot worse if I didn't do this own internal work before I got to that experience, right? So that's something we have to remind ourselves, that when we're dealing with something difficult, we may not have all the tools or the resources to deal with it in the ideal way. We may not be able to live up to our expectations, but it's worthwhile to take a step back and say, I still have more tools and resources now than I would have if I didn't engage in the spiritual path, right? So even able to do if I'm not able to make this the most perfect transformative experience, I'm much better off than I would have been if I hadn't done this inner work. So at least that gives us something to rejoice in and to realize that our practice has benefited us, even if we're not Buddhas yet. Okay. So there's always a way to understand that our practice is moving us towards Buddhahood, even though we're not there yet. And whatever difficulties we experience could be a lot worse if we hadn't done this inner work. Right? So trying to hold both those things at the same time is important. We celebrate all of our victories, we celebrate the growth that we have and what we have achieved, and we're always striving to achieve more. We can do those things at the same time.
Yes, Venerable. I'm also in a similar situation with my mom, who's been bedridden for the last 10 months. And, mother-daughter's relationships are usually pretty intense. So, I've also had that situation with my mother, but, as during this last 10 months period, I have somehow come to terms and I've completely dedicated myself to her. I do not hold anything against her. I'm with her every day, few hours, whatever. That's a given. Like you said, I'm not going to abandon her. I'm going to be there for her. I'm going to be beside her. I'm going to do everything that is necessary for her. But in my mind, is it because she's in that state of her life, which is the ultimate end, which I don't know when the ultimate end is, of course, none of us know. Yeah. But however, with somebody else who's not in that kind of a situation, am I willing to go that mile?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask, that's a good question to ask. And so what we can do and what is useful is, if you're able to experience like what you have right now with your mother, that's a good opportunity to then in your own meditation practice say, how can I cultivate this same level of care and dedication to others who aren't in this circumstance with me? And it's not going to be something you can just do, you can turn on and off, right? But it's a good example when you say, look at how easily I'm able to dedicate myself to this person's well-being and their happiness, and to as alleviating as much of their discomfort as I possibly can in this life. That's so easy for me. How can I then take that same instinct and apply it to others, especially others who are more difficult in my life, So it's an opportunity to say, if I can do it in this place, what is it about this certain circumstance that has made it so easy? How can I try to replicate that in the way I relate to others, Because as we said, there are some people in our lives who it's easier it's easier to have affection for. We're partial beings. We're not impartial. A Buddha is perfectly impartial. That's one of the qualities that make the Buddha a worthy object of refuge, is that a Buddha has totally impartial compassion for all sentient beings. So he could have one sentient being on one side, massaging oil into him, and on the other side, someone stabbing him with a knife, and he would have equal love and compassion for them, and he would be totally impartial towards them, or she would be totally impartial towards them. We aren't like that, right? We're partial beings. So instead, what we can do is we can recognize that and say, okay, in this circumstance, I'm able to cultivate love and compassion and work for their benefit wholeheartedly. How can I at least take that same flavor and apply it to other relationships in my life? And it won't be instantaneous, right? But it's a path of practice, and it's something to aim for. It's something that you can hold up as a motivational goal, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. So it'd be good. Let's try to get these next two verses down to finish this section. So the last two verses, we're talking about individual antidotes to these afflictive minds. When we notice them, when we recognize that we have these afflictive minds, our first action is to not act on them, and then we try to remedy them. Now, this verse, 57, is what we call the common antidote. So this is an antidote to all of our afflictive minds, which is to say it's meditating on emptiness. But so the verse says, in doing that, which by nature is not unwholesome, both for the sake of myself and other sentient beings, I should always hold my mind fast, acting like an apparition with no sense of self. Another translation of this line says, acting like an emanation that is without a truly existing I, right? So what this is saying is we can recognize that all of our afflicted minds, like I said, come from our self-grasping. The grasping at the self as if it truly existed, and the grasping at phenomena as if they truly exist, the way I perceive them, due to my own limited perception of reality. So what we call attachment is usually I look at another object and I superimpose my perception of beauty or aesthetic desire onto that object, and then I'm attached to that superimposition because I believe that superimposition of desire or beauty is inherently existent in that external object. What we call anger is me superimposing ugliness or undesirability onto an external object. Then I mistakenly believe that undesirability is inherently existing in that object, and therefore I react to that object with anger or with hatred, right? So our hatred and our desire come from us mistaking things that are not inherently existent as if they were inherently existent, right? That the way we perceive things, we believe that to be the way they really exist. And so instead of reacting to how things exist in the world, we react to how we perceive them, right? That's what it means to try to understand emptiness. Now, emptiness is a very complicated subject, and so we're not going to spend too much time on it here, but we can recognize, and the point of this one verse is recognizing that trying to acknowledge that things don't exist the way that I perceive them to exist. And therefore, most of my reactions to the external world are not reacting to how things really are, but they're reacting to my superimpositions that I place on top of reality. Just acknowledging that can make it easier to let go of the clinging, can make it easier to let go of the frustration or the anger or the happiness, right? The undue expectations. Because we are expecting things not out of reality, but out of our imagination, basically, right? So by doing that which is not unwholesome, both for the sake of myself and other sentient beings. So by seeking out virtuous behavior, not just for myself alone, but to benefit others, by doing that, and with the motivation to always pursue virtue, we have the double negative, but by doing that which is necessarily virtuous, not for myself alone, but for other sentient beings as well, I should hold my mind fast in that motivation. And when it is difficult to do so, I remind myself that when I'm swayed from that motivation that says instead of working for the benefit of others, instead of seeking out virtue, I should allow myself to relapse into non-virtue. I should allow myself to indulge in the delights of samsara alone. Whenever I have that recognition, I remind myself that things don't exist the way they appear to me, and all of my fascination with samsara is due to this fundamental ignorance. My attachment to external delight, my attachment to worldly happiness, my fear of worldly discomfort is all due to not understanding the nature of reality and to me reacting to my superimposed conceptions, not to how things actually exist. So being able to remind ourselves of this, even if we don't have a deep understanding of emptiness, right? Just being able to recognize that the way I perceive things around me is not the way they actually exist. And I'm reacting to my perception, not to the actual nature of things. Just being able to remind ourselves of this helps make our reactions or our emotional constitution less reactionary and more considered, right? It turns down the volume a little bit on our reactionary nature. So that's why it's considered to be a common antidote. Because if you actually understand that nothing exists the way I perceive it to exist, then all of the afflictive minds don't have anything to hang on to, and they all dissipate of their own, right? And then lastly, the last verse we'll look at today is how to actually go about implementing these types of training. So it's verse 58, and it's very easy to understand, very difficult to employ in our life. But it says, by thinking again and again that after a long time I have finally won the greatest of leisure, likewise I should hold my mind as utterly unshakable like the king of mountains. Right? So this is saying that, reminding myself of all of the privileges I have, both as having a perfect human rebirth that is endowed with the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments, but also just having the resources I have in my life, the worldly resources, as well as the emotional and spiritual resources, reminding myself of that and reminding of myself of the amount of effort it took in this life and in previous lives to accumulate all of these resources. Then I should make the most of these resources by always making my mind stable, by making my introspection and my mindfulness as powerful as I can to make sure that my motivation is always virtuous. And I should create a sense of stability that is like, Mount Meru, the king of mountains, unshakable, the center of all existence, unable to be overcome, right? That's what this means by saying like Mount Meru, like the king of mountains. So habituation is important. That's what's reminding us that I can't just do something once and expect it to become my new way of being. I have to work. I have to remind myself that the self-cherishing mind has been something that has been leading me around like it has a ring in my nose for my whole life. So in order to overcome it, I have to actively work. I have to put in the effort all the time to be aware of what is my motivation, what is leading me down this path. And by habituating myself to this practice, by making introspection and mindfulness a part of every day moment or every moment of my life, by making that a habit, then I make virtue a natural way of being in the world, right? It makes me acclimate towards virtue in such a way that it doesn't require effort. So I have to make my Dharma practice unshakable, right? That doesn't mean I'm a perfected being, but it means that I'm always working in the right direction. So I think that is a good place to end today. Just as a preview, the next set of verses is going to be how to train in the virtue of gathering, how to train in the ethic of gathering virtue. And that will be up through verse 83. And then after that is going to be how to train in the ethic of benefiting others. So as we talked about, these 2 chapters are especially talking about morality. And there are 3 types of morality, right, that we mentioned. There is the morality of restraint, the morality of gathering virtue, and the morality of working to benefit others. So as we continue next week, we're going to start looking into how using mindfulness and introspection can help us train in the other types of morality, not just the morality of restraint. And the reason that's a good thing to remind ourselves is that is a way to look at everything we've been studying today in the last week or so as how to use mindfulness and introspection specifically to practice the morality of restraint, specifically to help prevent us from engaging in non-virtuous behavior. So then the next step is going to be how to help encourage virtuous behavior. Now, of course, those aren't independent, right? They work hand in hand, but the focus of the text shifts a little bit, right? So it's useful to remind ourselves of that. So with that, it is noon, so we have some time for questions if there are any questions.
Yes, Venerable, I have a question.
Sure.
Verse 49.
Uh-huh.
So it's in this verse 49, the third line, which says, when I have the intention to describe the faults of others.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that could be called as venting in modern times, right? I-
Uh,
and and we do
yeah.
think that sometimes, I'm not saying sometimes venting feeds the anger, I agree, but sometimes it doesn't. I mean, you just sort of let it out and then you're able to, keep it, put it aside and go on. So would
Is
that
that really
be?
what happens though? When you
No,
vent, do
no,
you
I
really?
agree that sometimes it does feed into the anger. Uh, but not always. And so is this venting, is it venting that they are describing, he is describing here,
Um,
and is that a to be avoided at all costs?
well, I mean, to say avoid it at all cost is a little bit extreme. Describing the faults of others can be beneficial insofar as that when I recognize faults in others, then I can make sure that I don't engage in similar behavior, right? So sometimes describing or recognizing the faults of others is useful insofar as it can serve as a mirror for my own behavior in my own mind, right? But in general, aside from that, um, recognizing and describing the faults of others doesn't bring about benefit. And especially we talked about when we look at mind training, especially we're trying to destroy the self-cherishing mind. So much more powerful to recognize a single fault in our own mind than it is to recognize 1,000 faults in others. And so venting, describing the faults of others, it's very rare that you're actually letting it go by saying it out loud, by commiserating with someone. Oh yeah, that guy's really a jerk, isn't he? It's very rare that once you've said that, now you've let it go and you're not upset anymore. Maybe it's possible. And so you'd have to look at your mind. And if you think, not just you, I mean anyone, like the general you, if you think that by expressing those faults out loud and by commiserating with someone, you're actually able to totally let them go and no longer be attached to them and no longer cultivate that sense of frustration or anger or a lack of love or empathy. If that is something you're able to do, then sure, you can go ahead and do so. It's very unlikely though. Usually when we express those type when we vent in that way, all we're doing is feeding our self-cherishing mind and the recognition that at least I'm not like that. That person's like that, but I don't have those problems. I'm not as bad as that person. That's usually one of the underlining substructures that is motivating our venting. And so you have to just look at your motivation. And it is possible, I suppose, to vent, as we say, in such a way that isn't encouraging your own negative minds, but is unlikely. And even
But
if it is possible, it's usually more beneficial to look at your own minds, you know?
no, it could be possible when you are living with difficult people, when they are part of your everyday life, and you have to deal with that behavior over and over and over again. And so then you went and you say, oh well, I know that so and so is like that, this is not new to me, this is
Mm-hmm.
behavior to type, and I cannot be pulling my hair out uh, you
Mm.
know morning evening. So yes, this is so you recognize, just so that you are able to see that, yeah, there is
Yeah,
nothing I
yeah,
can do for this
I
person
understand. So that
at this
doesn't, so
point.
for me, when you say
Uh,
that, that doesn't sound like venting. That
okay.
sounds like, so I mean, again, this might just be pedantic, right? So when you said something like that, what that makes me think of is you recognizing the reality of a situation and then saying, this is how things are. These are the resources I have to navigate it in a meaningful way. So it's the same thing as me saying when I was dealing with my mother and she was sick, she would treat me really poorly. And I just knew that she was going to say mean things to me and that she was going to act in a certain way. And I wasn't going to change her. I wasn't in a position where I was going to adapt her mind or convince her that what she was doing wasn't helpful. So by recognizing that, by saying it out loud, me and my sister had these similar conversations. We weren't venting. We weren't saying, "Oh my God, how dare she do these things?" We were saying, "Oh no, this is what to expect." And if I expect A, B, and C, then I won't be surprised when it happens, right? So I don't think of that as venting. I think of that as recognizing if there is someone who is engaging in behavior that is harmful or is at least not productive, then recognizing it and then preparing yourself for it emotionally and mentally so that when it happens, you aren't overwhelmed by it and you don't react out of anger, then that could be useful. But I don't think of that as venting. That might just be a different pedantic distinction on my part. But for me, venting means like, oh my God, can you believe they're doing this again? This person is such a jerk, or they didn't clean their laundry yet again. They threw their laundry on the floor of their room, or whatever it may be. They left the dirty dishes in the sink. That is venting, like complaining about someone else's faults, pointing out their faults, not because you want to prevent your own negative reaction to their faults, but because you want to set yourself apart as not having those faults, right?
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
what I think of when I think of venting.
Okay.
So the example you gave, I think it can be done. But again, always watch your motivation. That's the most important part. If your
Right.
motivation, no matter what form the words take, just check why you're doing it. And then that is what's going to determine if it's beneficial or if it's harmful.
Yes, Venerable. Thank
Um, any other questions? I see a hand. Sangeeta, do you have a question? Or, oh, no, different hand now. See, this is
Yeah.
why I don't trust the
So,
hands.
Venerable, sorry, someone else
Yeah.
is wanting to
No,
talk?
go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So, no, I was just wondering that, about the self-cherishing. I was wondering that till you become a Buddha, there will be always a self-referential content in all your actions, right? So, it's only the quantum of the self-reference because I think, is that true that there'll be always a self-reference in all your actions of body, speech, and mind till you become a Buddha?
What do you mean by
Uh,
self-reference? I'm
As
not
in
sure what.
some kind of, even if you're working, there will be, I was reading another session I had with Geshe Dorji Damdul where he mentioned that the subtle self-centered attitude remains even in the 10th Bhumi Bodhisattva. And that subtle self-centered attitude will go only at the time you become a Buddha. So that concept of I am more important than others may be going away when you become the eighth bhumi, but when you become an arhat, so self-grasping is gone. So the gross self-centered attitude saying I am more important than others goes away, but the subtle self-reference remains even. Will go only when you become a Buddha. Did I
So,
get the teaching wrong, or am I?
well, I haven't heard the term self-reference, but in general, as you point out, when you achieve the eighth bhumi, so a bodhisattva achieves the first bhumi when they become an arhat and have a direct realization of emptiness, and then as they progress in the path of meditation and they achieve the eighth bhumi, they have
Right.
abandoned all of the afflictive minds as well as their seeds and abandoned samsara completely. So they'll have no self-cherishing at all. Up until then,
Right.
they'll have some sort of subtle self-cherishing. Even a bodhisattva who has bodhicitta all the time will have some subtle self-cherishing, much less than
Right.
ours. But on the eighth, ninth, and 10th grounds, all you have left are obstacles or to omniscience. And so usually we think of those as imprints. And the most common one is the imprint of ignorance, which is our dualistic appearance. So even though we aren't Buddhas yet, even though you have achieved the realization of emptiness and you understand the nature of reality, that things don't exist in the way they appear to us, that except when you're in meditative equipoise, everything still appears in a dualistic way as if it had a truly existing self. And so that might be what he's saying. This self-referential thing still exists in a subtle way. That things still appear as if they have a truly existing self, a person and a phenomena until you become a Buddha. Even though you don't believe it and you don't act on it, unless you're in meditative equipoise, you still have that subtle perception of truly existing self. So that is what we usually say is the most important thing that is abandoned on the eighth, ninth, and 10th grounds. So that's what it sounds like he's referencing, because self-cherishing and self-grasping are entirely gone, as well as all of their seeds when you hit the eighth ground.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, that helps. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Venerable,
Okay.
a question. Yes. So given the circumstance, you being in your environment, we being in the worldly environment, is it simpler, easier, more mindful for you, or do you think it is difficult for us in this side of samsara to practice all
Mhm.
this?
I think that no matter where you go, you bring your mind with you, right? You can't outrun your mind. You can't outrun samsara. Living as a monk definitely provides me a easier opportunity to engage in practice than having the responsibilities of a layperson. So having to deal with a partner, with a family, with children, with having a job, with having to work in the world are adding levels of complications to your life that I don't necessarily experience. And In the same way, never mind that. I mean, I know monks and nuns who work, especially monks and nuns who live in America, who don't have a monastery to support them. They might have to engage in some activity. They might have rent. They might have to do these things. So they live in this weird nebulous space that's between the life of an ordained person and a lay person. Even then, the vows of a monastic make the whole point of the vows is to make your life more meaningful and to make it easier for you to practice virtue, right? The point of the vows isn't to limit your ability to stop you from doing the things you want to do, but to encourage you to be liberated and to, engage in meaningful behavior. And so having those vows as part of my continuum and doing my best to practice them purely, and then putting myself in an environment where I have less worldly responsibilities as opposed to a layperson definitely makes it easier for me to practice. But I take samsara with me. I know people who find monastery a living hell. The in the sutra of what is most precious to a monk. There's a line that's I don't remember exactly now. Tsongkhapa quotes it all the time, but it's to the extent of, for someone who is disciplined, who has good ethical discipline, the vows are heavenly. And for someone who has poor ethical discipline, the vows are like hell, right? So trying to live a moral life, trying to follow the vows, even the pratimoksha vows of a layperson, when you have good moral discipline, then they support you. They make your life easier. But if you don't have good moral discipline, they make your life harder or your experience harder. So what I think, from my personal experience, and I didn't ordain until I was 27, right? So I'd lived a whole life, and I had a partner, and I had a job, and obviously I did a lot of schooling. So I had all these things before I became a monk. My experience is that living the life of a monk gives me more opportunity to practice in an easier way. So it's creating an external environment that makes it easier for me to practice. And it's ridding myself of external responsibilities that other people in the world aren't able to free themselves of. So for me personally, it's setting myself up for a deeper level of practice and an easier type of practice, because I don't have the same obstacles that many of you have to experience just by living in the world, by having to go to work, by having to deal with family, by having to deal with partners, right? By having to own property, all these things. I don't have to worry about those things. So for me, that's beneficial. However, we have many examples of lay people who achieved high levels of realization. Atisha's main student in Tibet was Drum Tompa, who had a family. Marpa, who was the teacher of Milarepa, had a family and had sons. And these were lay people that they lived their lives. They had wives, they had families, and yet they still achieved great levels of realization. So it is possible to achieve high levels of realization regardless of your environment. Some environments are going to make it easier, and some are going to make it more difficult. So that's kind of the general answer. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I've met lay people who have partners and who, do all the things a lay person does. They have a job, they have a house, they have a apartment. And yet for them, all the pieces fit together in such a way that they're able to practice in a really meaningful way. And those things don't serve as obstacles to them. It's because they've incorporated that part of their life into their practice, right? So they're not fighting against it. Right. So you have to say, this is what I have. This is the place I am in the world right now. This is what my circumstances are. I'm not able to go to the mountains and live in retreat. I'm not able to ordain. This is what I have. How can I take these resources, this circumstance, and use it to the best of my ability? Whatever it is, because no matter how far I run, I can't outrun samsara. I can't outrun my mind. So this is what I have available to me. I'm going to use it the best I can. And in the future, if circumstances change and I have an opportunity to change my environment, then I'll do that and make the best of that. Right. So that's what we have to learn how to do, is make the best of whatever environment we find ourselves in.
Motivation and intentionality.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, that's what
okay. So with that, I think that's a great place to end it today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I don't want to keep you any longer. We're going late. So let's take a moment to recognize that in our practice together today, we've accumulated some merit. And let's generate the wish that any merit we have accumulated, we can dedicate that to others, so that instead of that merit just ripening on us, we wish that it would ripen on others, that it would relieve others of their suffering, that merit can be dedicated to all of our holy gurus. They may continue to display having long and healthy lives. They may continue to teach the Dharma. They might continue to lead sentient beings that are suffering. For all those who are experiencing suffering of body and mind, that they might be quickly relieved of that suffering. Those who have died may quickly find a perfect human rebirth and meet with Mahayana spiritual friends. And may that merit we've accumulated today especially ripen on our own achievement of perfect complete Buddhahood as quickly as possible, so that we might be of maximum benefit to be of service to other sentient beings. And with this dedication, we will offer a few quick, brief dedication prayers. We will offer this first dedication prayer once in Tibetan and then once in English, and then we'll do a few verses celebrating or requesting the long life of His Holiness Dalai Lama. Choe Sum Ling Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyu Chi Ke Wa Nya Pa Me Pa Yang Gone Gon Tu Pe Wa Zhou. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the Snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, to the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equally in the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable, so much.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Venerable, so much
Venerable.
for
Thank you,
today.
Venerable.
What wonderful teachings these were. Thank you all for joining us this Saturday and Sunday, the last 2 days, for wonderful teachings by, again, Gyalten Lekden. Next Saturday and Sunday, we will have a Venerable in person at CKSL to continue the teachings that we had today. Next Friday, there won't be any classes as we have finished the Meditation 101 program. We are going to soon start Buddhism in a Nutshell. I hope all of you can join in. Buddhism in a Nutshell is another introductory program. We'll be offering it in person and online. We will send you the details of that very soon. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.